So we're roughly 11 months away from Election Day. What are your predictions in terms of, you were giving possibilities, but guys, what are your predictions in terms of what the Demos versus the Republicans are going to do? Who's going to control the House? Who's going to control the Senate?
Wouldn't it be something if it came down to the Louisiana Senate race being the deciding factor, whether Landrieu gets reelected or whether Republicans reelected? Could be very close, and that's an interesting scenario. And of course, I think the Republicans are playing that in about 5 key states, Louisiana being one of the states. Gosh, maybe from the PR aspect, and I think the TV stations and radio stations will love all the money that's going to be thrown down here. But it's going to be an obscene amount of money spent on this Louisiana race. We're already seeing a number of ads. I can't think going back when Landrieu ran 6 years ago or 12 years ago, when all this early money was being spent so far in advance, both pro and con.
And it's outside money. It's that what bothers me, whether it's from the Republican or Democrats, what we're seeing is we're seeing outside money. I remember back whenever it was 1990 or so, when David Duke was running against J. Bennett Johnston and Ben Baggert, and what Duke was saying, hey, this is Louisiana. Why is it that the outside money is coming here to try to defeat me? And then when Baggert left the race, again, Duke was saying, well, I mean, this is, outsiders trying to tell us how to run our U.S. Senate race. I just got something today from the Republicans who are a outside PAC telling me how bad Mary Landrieu is and how bad Mary Landrieu is going to be for Louisiana. Whether they're right or wrong, and whether it's from the GOP or the Democrats, I'm just wondering whether or not we are able to really control our own destiny in terms of whether, even though it's a federal election, whether or not David Duke was right all along. That is that local people ought to decide who they're going to vote for locally rather than being inundated and controlled by the outside.
Well, I don't know what Warren thinks about this. Be interested in his opinion. But what we found is the U.S. Senate has become it's not our senator anymore. The lobbyists and the money interests are not looking at a Louisiana senator or a California senator or New York senator. They're looking for a vote on their issues. And so what this has become, you happen to be elected in Louisiana, but when it comes to the outside money, you're just a potential vote. If you're a potential vote for their cause, even though they may be based in California and have huge California interests, if they think that Mary Landrieu can be a vote for their cause and they need 51 votes, then they're going to pour money into this race. So actually, U.S. Senate races across the country become almost national races where you turn to your congressman more for the local issues involving flood control and farming interests, whatever happens to be here in Louisiana. The senator still espouses that that's their interest, but quite frankly, I'll bet if you took the average U.S. senator and looked at the time they spent on national issues versus local issues, it'd be a lot more nationally, and they spend a great deal of their time with lobbyists on these whole national issues. So the focus has changed, and you know how you solve that? Prohibit any money from outside the state. If you're not if you're not a registered voter in Louisiana, then that's the only person that can contribute if you want to keep it local. I don't know how else to do it because of the vast amount of money and the stakes that are involved.
Sure. Lawrence?
Well, Jim hit the nail on the head. There are so many special interest groups in Washington that I suspect that if any one of us could just get $1 for every special interest group that is operating in Washington, D.C., we'd all be millionaires. I mean, that's how many of them there are. They're everywhere. And so they are looking for votes. They are looking, whether it's a conservative group who's opposed to more environmental laws, or a more liberal group that's in favor of removing all handguns in America. They have their special interest. That's all they care about. That's that one special interest. And so what they're trying to do is, and I hate to use the phrase, but they're trying to buy the influence, get their influence with a particular member of Congress, and that's why they spend all the money that they spend. There is a huge concern in Washington from the members of the Congress, the House and the Senate, about how their vote is going to impact, not the major concern being Louisiana, how is that vote going to impact all of these special interest groups? How much money did they give me? Did they give me a lot of money when I ran for election? I got to run again. It costs a lot of money to run for election in Louisiana, all across the country, including Louisiana. I need to raise money. If I vote against this legislation that they're for, if I vote against it or I vote for something that they're against, I run the risk of not getting any financing from them. So the outside influence is huge in Washington, and it has clouded the ability of the members of Congress to truly represent the interest back home. You know, if the people of Louisiana favor a particular issue or they're opposed to an issue, look, I'm not sitting here telling you that a member of Congress may not have an issue of conscience that they have to vote a certain way or do vote a certain way, but their consideration should be, what do their constituents want? That should be the #1 issue, not what some liberal MoveOn.org or what the Koch brothers want on the conservative side. It should be, what is it that the people of Louisiana want? What is in the best interest of Louisiana? With all this outside money that's coming in, and we're going to see a lot more of it,
Sure.
It's a real issue, and it changes the focus from where it should be to where it shouldn't be.
Well, speaking of predictions in the federal elections, and speaking of the Mary Landrieu race, we now have someone else who says that he's going to run for U.S. Senate, and that's Paul Hollis. Paul is very, very capable person. He's the son of Senator Hollis, the former senator and late Senator Hollis. In my opinion, a wonderful man. But what's Paul doing? I mean, does he have a chance? He's been in the state. He's been a state rep for a couple of years. Doesn't have really that much of a voting record, and he's running as a Republican. He's a Republican. There's two other Republicans, actually three, but two of them who have really been raising money and profile. That of course being Bill Cassidy and Colonel Rob Menace, who is a Tea Party favorite. So, I guess what Mary Landrieu is probably laughing all the way to the bank, is she, or what's the prediction?
Well, I personally don't think Mary Landrieu is sitting on 50% plus one. I don't think that her vote right now exceeds 50%, which is what she would need to have on election day in the primary to avoid a runoff. So now, what number is she at? I don't know, but let's say for discussion purposes, she's at 45%. That's 55% of the vote that's going to go somewhere else. Now, even though you split it up, let's say among 2 or 3 major Republicans, when the runoff comes in December of this year, later on this year, the Republican votes are going to coalesce around the Republican candidate, and is that candidate going to be able to put together that 51% and hold Mary below 50, which means she doesn't get reelected? The Republicans are splitting the vote. You certainly do not want to have, from a political standpoint, you'd rather not have your candidate make the runoff, let's say with the incumbent at 45% or 46% or some number like that, and have your candidate at, say, 29%. I mean, that's a huge gap. But I do think that the numbers will come together, at the end of the day. But it's not good to have all that vote split up.
Sure, Jim.
Yeah, I'd suggest this to you. You talked about the Hollis situation. I think the motivation, first of all, there's not yet buyer's remorse, but Bill Cassidy, who's my congressman up here, very nice guy, doctor, hasn't at this point at least caught on as many Republicans thought he would. Some are even wishing they'd maybe turn to Congressman who's standing over in West Louisiana, Steve Scalise, the New Orleans area. But so Bill still has yet to make himself a major force in this campaign, and that's just to be developed, number one. And so there are some Republicans that may be scurrying around that line. Number two, until you told me, Ken Hollis was a friend of mine, served in the legislature with him, and nice guy. Until you told me his son was in the legislature, I didn't even know it. But now that he says he's running for United States Senator, possibly, well, then he's getting a lot of attention, a lot of name recognition. It's a free way to get your name out there by merely putting out a press release. So I think, and then maybe you put out the press release, and maybe there's some folks that kind of get interested in you. You never know. But you always see in the governor's race and in all these upscale races, when I was running, I held several statewide offices. Always somebody's going to run who's a legislator or a police juror, then they kind of fade into the sunset. So I think Hollis sees an opportunity, get his name out there, and who knows what may happen. So we'll probably see a few other candidates do the same thing in the months to come.
Well, let me add one thing, Steve. I have to agree with Jim that I do think there is some disappointment inside Republican circles over the way that the Cassidy campaign is going right now. I personally believe that his strength right now is the fact that he is a sitting U.S. congressman from Baton Rouge, and he's a Republican. So I think that's where his strength is coming from right now. I also believe that there are a lot of folks out there who think that campaign that for the Senate, the Republican campaign for the Senate, would be a lot more vocal and much greater presence than what that campaign has had going recently. Well, in the last few months, it's time for the Cassidy campaign to kick it into gear. It's time for that campaign to start getting out there. People don't know Congressman Cassidy. They know him in his district, but they really don't know him in Metairie. They really don't know him in Mandeville. They really don't know him in South Louisiana, and for that matter, North Louisiana. He's got to get himself known. It's not going to be enough to just say, I'm against Obamacare, vote for me. You've got to have something more going for you than simply saying that. And that's what the campaign needs to do. But there are folks out there who basically, number one, are concerned about the way the campaign has been run so far. And secondly, you talk to some rank and file Republicans and you say, well, who are you for? They say, well, I'm for Congressman Cassidy. Well, why? Well, he's a leading candidate. That's not a good reason either. You got to get a substantive reason as to why you for someone. So that's why you see in some Republicans from around the state also in the race, because they are they pick up the same thing. They talk to their friends and folks, and they're not happy with the way things are, and that's why they're jumping in the race.
And one thing I could add on that, Steve, also is, and I think Lawrence will agree with me because we're both of the old school, Louisiana is still a retail state when it comes to politics. People want to see you, they want to shake your hand, they want to touch you, particularly if you're not an incumbent. And Cassidy, I don't see him around a whole lot, and I also say this, don't see Mary Landrieu around a lot. But if you look at the real successful races, when you're getting to a race against an incumbent, that challenger or someone going for an open seat needs to be everywhere, in every parade, shaking hands, calling the movers and the shakers. I'd be interested in knowing someone, Lawrence, I don't know if you've gotten a call from the congressman, but I would assume that he's called the top 25 political figures in Jefferson Parish, of which Lawrence Hardy would be one, and I'll bet you $100 he's not done that. So, the retail networks are so important in a state like Louisiana, even though it's gotten bigger. And quite frankly, at this stage, Cassidy has not proven himself to be a retail politician.
Well, people do want their elected officials. They want to see them. They want to touch them. They want to shake their hand. They want to see them. And if they don't actually see them, the fact that someone running for public office was in the town parade, was at the town celebration. Maybe I wanted to go, but something came up at the last minute. I couldn't go, but my friends went. And my friends told me that this guy who's running for senator, governor, what have you, he was there. and that's what people want. They want to touch and feel. We're not just a media state. I think more so than a lot of other states, we're looking to see and touch and talk to the people who want to be our political leaders.
If I might just throw something out, and that is, Lawrence, you mentioned about 50% plus one, and you're right. I mean, Landrieu, at this point in time, as I understand, is her numbers are in the mid 40s in terms of favorables, and she's got a way to go. Now, one thing that we haven't seen though is her money being put up for her commercials. We haven't seen Cassidy's money. We've seen the outside money, and the Republicans are actually going to be beating up one another. Yeah, they're going to also throw their axe at Landrieu, and that's what they've done with their own when they have spent their money or their focus. But they're basically going to be beating up one another. And what you're going to see is you're going to see the negatives of Menace and certainly Cassidy and Hollis. You're going to see their negatives begin to build. And who's going to be the recipient of that, the beneficiary of that, is going to be Landrieu. Is it going to be enough to put her up to 50.1, 50 plus one vote? Don't know. But it doesn't help. It certainly doesn't help. And then the question is, and remember I'm sure Jim remembers this, and Lawrence, you also believe, the race where I think Broussard was going to run for governor. I think there were about 10, 12 people running. I think, Jim, you were looking at that race too. And then I think that was the race, I believe, that I think Romer won. And I'm just wondering, does this mean that now that Paul gets into the race, Paul House gets into the race, now you have roughly 3 people with some name recognition? Does that open the door for more people? Lawrence, are you going to run? Jim?
No.
Actually, I've done my time. I'll tell you what. I'll endorse Lawrence Shahardy for United States Senator right now. I'll write a column about it next week. I think this could be a very important jumping off point. Lawrence, go ahead, jump in.
I'd like that. I've told folks, I said, because people approach me all the time. Well, are you going to run for this or run for that? And I said, no, I'm not. My days are over. I said, if they insist upon it, make a wager with them, and I'll go 50-50 with you on your wager for any amount of money. Just make sure they can pay off at the end when I don't run.
Is there a possibility
people
will run and jump in, though?
What's that?
I said, looking at the past in terms of what's happened with elections past, my main question, I guess, is there a possibility now, given what Hollis has done, is there a possibility now that more people will actually jump into the race now that we're in 2014?
Well, look, that's always a possibility, particularly if the perception is that the field out there is not a strong field. Among Republicans want to defeat Mary Landrieu. There's absolutely no question about that. Republicans also feel that this is the best opportunity that they have ever had to win this race, to defeat Senator Landrieu for re-election. Now, if we get into April, May, June, and Congressman Cassidy is not catching on the way people believe that he should be, it's very possible somebody else may jump into that race. You just don't know. But at the end of the day, Republicans may beat up on each other, but at the end of the day, if there's a runoff between Senator Landrieu and a Republican candidate, I would tell you that the greatest likelihood is that Republicans will rally around the Republican candidate. And then the election will be decided by a handful of swing voters who are going to decide whether or not Senator Landrieu should stay or Senator Landrieu should go. And that group is going to ultimately make the decision, and that's probably well less than 10% of the voters in the state.
Could I just make one final comment? And I've got a speech I've got to make at noon today, so I'm going to sign off after this. But I got a great story to tell you. Harry Lee, the wonderful sheriff of Jefferson Parish, is such an icon, such an individual, would hold his annual big fundraiser down at the Hilton Hotel in downtown New Orleans. Lawrence, what, 3,000 or 4,000 people would come, jam-packed. Harry would stand there kind of at the front door and shake everybody's hand. So Lawrence Shahardy Sr., Lawrence's dad, there were some rumors about him possibly running for governor, and he would have been a heck of a candidate for governor back, I think, in 1979.
That's correct. That's correct.
I go down to the Harry Lee fundraiser. Now, Harry Lee is at the door standing there, but right before you get to Harry Lee is Lawrence Shahardy, and he's shaking everybody's hand, and I laughed. I said, you know, this guy is brilliant. He's kind of taken over the Lee rally. It's a Lawrence Shahardy rally. He is the ultimate retail politician. So I just make that point. And Lawrence has got 1,000 stories like that where his dad was, he'd come to the legislature. You'd come into the room, and he'd dominate the room. He'd shake everybody's hand. He'd work the crowd. He'd remember your name. There wasn't a better retail politician, in my opinion, than Lawrence Shahardy. So I just wanted to share that story because
sure. And I know that you have to go. You told me ahead of time. Let me just throw one last question out, and then we'll say goodbye, and we'll maybe tomorrow do local races rather than the national races. But the question I have is that there is some talk about Mary Landrieu possibly becoming the chairperson of the Senate Energy Committee. Now, if that happens, then obviously there's going to be some big money, I would think, who are going to be supporting her, and I'm talking about oil and gas money, supporting her because of her positions and her potential clout. Assuming that happens, you know, what is that going to happen to the race?
Well, I don't think it engenders votes particularly. I mean, she's up there fighting for oil interests, as are people from the oil states. And if you're the chairman, I think those days of being the Mr. Chairman and being this huge powerhouse are gone. We've seen too many chairmen who've gotten defeated back in their home. The Ted Cruzes of Texas, who take them on, have won, and you've seen a number of this. So I don't think it generates votes. Yes, it'll mean money.
Ted Cruz in this race at this point in time. I mean, there's no Ted Cruz at this point in time, but I understand the bigger point. Sure.
I'm just saying, as far as I don't think it gets the average person. I don't think the average person in New Orleans is going to, I guess now I'm going to vote for Mary Landrieu because she's chairman of the Energy Committee. That's, you know, quite frankly, if you took a poll based on the lawsuits going on the wetlands, more people are for cleaning up the wetlands and let the oil companies do it than for the oil companies. So I don't think that's a huge plus, quite frankly.
But it's money. It's money.
Yeah. But I don't think money is going to be an issue. I think when you're talking about the control of the United States Senate, that you're going to see both parties pour a ton of money in down here. Everybody, sure, more helps. More TV spots we'll be sick of watching. But I don't think in the overall scheme of things that's going to decide whether Mary Landrieu is reelected. Now, that's just my opinion.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't believe that a chairmanship of a committee is going to make the difference in the the Senate race. Look, I'm not telling you somebody may not vote for her because of being the chairman of the Energy Committee, but I don't believe it's going to amount to any number of votes. I really believe this race is going to come down to the philosophical issues, number one. Of how candidates have voted and how the voters feel about those votes that the candidates have cast. I think that's what it's going to come down to. And then, of course, underlying all that, it's going to be the mechanics of the campaign, how well the campaign is in the street, how well they get their voters out, how many people has that candidate been able to shake hands with and talk to and that sort of thing. I think it's going to be traditional campaign. Money's important, money's critical, but that money's going to flow anyway. And let me tell you, if they decide that they're going to dump all this money on one candidate and they look like these special interests think the other guy is going to do better, watch how quick they change ships. There's no loyalty there. There's nothing there except they want to buy influence. So I think it's going to come down to issues.
Yeah, well, thank you. We're going to change shifts right now. I know that Jim needs to shift gears and get to his speech. And so, listen, let's do it again tomorrow, hopefully. By the way, congrats to Jeff Carrere. Jeff and his engagee, Simone is Bruni is or getting engaged. Well, they are engaged, I should say.
I saw his picture with the ring on Facebook this morning. So I send my best wishes to Jeff also. Absolutely. Hey, Happy New Year's to you, guy. I look forward to talking to you tomorrow.
Thanks,
Jim.
Bye-bye.